The snow fell gently outside the windows of St. Andrew's Chapel as the Christmas Eve service came to an end, families gathering their children and preparing to head home for their holiday celebrations. Inside the warm sanctuary, decorated with garlands and flickering candles, most of the congregation had already departed, leaving behind the peaceful quiet that settles over sacred spaces after joyful gatherings. Daniel Whitmore sat alone in the back pew, his expensive gray coat dusted with snow from his walk through the downtown streets. At 38, he was the CEO of a successful investment firm, but tonight he felt disconnected from the holiday joy surrounding him. 3 years had passed since his divorce, and despite his professional success, he found himself spending most holidays alone, wondering if wealth and achievement were poor substitutes for the family life he had never quite managed to build. As Daniel prepared to leave, he noticed a small figure in a red velvet dress standing near the altar, looking around with the careful attention of a child who seemed to be searching for someone. The little girl appeared to be about 4 years old, with blonde curls and the kind of patient stillness that suggested she was accustomed to waiting for adults who were often busy or distracted. Daniel looked around the chapel, expecting to see parents gathering their belongings or talking with the minister, but the sanctuary was nearly empty, except for a few people cleaning up after the service. The child seemed to be alone, which struck him as both unusual and concerning. "Excuse me, sweetheart," Daniel said gently, approaching the little girl. "Are you looking for your family?" The child turned to face him with serious blue eyes that seemed older than her years. "I am looking for my mama," she said in a small voice. "She said she would be right back, but that was a long time ago." Daniel felt his chest tighten with concern. "What is your name, honey?" "I am Grace," she replied, smoothing down her red dress with careful hands. "Mama brought me to church because she said it was important to be here on Christmas Eve. But then she had to go outside to talk to someone, and she has not come back." Daniel knelt down to Grace's level, speaking in the same gentle tone he used with his business associates' children at company events. "Grace, that is a beautiful name. How long has your mama been gone?" Grace looked around the chapel, which was now significantly emptier than when Daniel had first noticed her. "A very long time," she said with the vague time sense that children possess, "since before the singing stopped." Daniel realized that Grace had been alone for at least 20 minutes, possibly longer. He looked toward the chapel doors, hoping to see a frantic parent rushing in to collect their child. But the entrance remained empty. "Grace, would you like me to help you find your mama?" Daniel asked. "We could look outside together." Grace studied his face with the careful assessment that children learn when they need to be cautious about trusting adults. "Are you a nice man?" she asked directly. "I try to be," Daniel replied honestly. "And I think it is very important that we find your mama so she does not worry about you." Grace nodded and slipped her small hand into Daniel's larger one, with the trust that children sometimes offer to adults who speak to them with respect and genuine concern. They walked together toward the chapel entrance, Daniel scanning the snowy street outside for any sign of a woman who might be looking for her daughter. The sidewalks were mostly empty, with only a few people hurrying through the falling snow toward their warm homes. "Grace," Daniel said as they stood in the chapel doorway, "can you tell me what your mama looks like? That might help us find her." "She has yellow hair like mine," Grace replied, "and she wears a blue dress. She is very pretty, but sometimes she looks sad." Daniel felt something twist in his chest at the innocent observation. "Does your mama look sad very often?" Grace nodded solemnly. "Since Papa went away to heaven, Mama says Papa is watching over us, but I think she misses him very much." Daniel understood immediately that Grace was not just a lost child, but a child who had already experienced the kind of loss that changes everything about a family's life. The careful way she spoke about her father suggested someone who had been taught to process grief with remarkable maturity for her age. "Grace, I am very sorry about your papa," Daniel said gently. "That must make you and your mama very sad sometimes." "It does," Grace replied with the honest directness that children possess. "But Mama says that Papa would want us to be happy and to help other people when we can." As they continued to watch for Grace's mother, Daniel found himself drawn into Conversation with this remarkable little girl who spoke about loss and hope with equal measures of wisdom and innocence. "Do you have children, Mr. Daniel?" Grace asked, having learned his name during their conversation. "No, I do not," Daniel replied. "I always thought I would someday, but it just never happened for me." Grace looked at him with the serious consideration that children give to important adult revelations. "That makes me sad for you," she said simply. "I think you would be a very good papa." Daniel felt his throat tighten at the unexpected kindness in her words. "What makes you think that, Grace?" "Because you stopped to help me when you did not have to," Grace replied with the clear logic of childhood. "And because you talk to me like I am important, not like I am just a little kid who does not understand things." 20 more minutes passed, without any sign of Grace's mother, and Daniel began to worry that something more serious might have happened. He was considering whether to contact the police when Grace tugged on his coat and looked up at him, with eyes that held a mixture of hope and desperation. "Mr. Daniel," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something very important." "What is that, sweetheart?" Grace took a deep breath as if gathering courage for something that required all her bravery. "I do not have a papa anymore, and sometimes Mama cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. If we cannot find Mama, or if something happened to her too, would you maybe want to be my daddy? Not just for tonight, but forever?" The words hit Daniel with such force that he had to sit down on the chapel steps, pulling Grace gently onto his lap as he processed what she had just asked. This little girl who had been abandoned in a church and had every reason to be frightened was offering him the very thing he had been searching for without knowing it. The chance to be the father he had always hoped to become. "Grace," Daniel said carefully, "that is the most special thing anyone has ever asked me. But I think we should keep looking for your mama first. She must be very worried about you. But if we do not find her," Grace persisted, "would you think about it? I promise I would be a very good daughter. I know how to be quiet when grown-ups are working, and I can make my own bed, and I always say please and thank you." Daniel looked at this precious child who was essentially interviewing him for the position of father, and felt his heart break and heal at the same time. "Grace, you would be the most wonderful daughter any man could ask for. Any father would be lucky to have you." Just then, Daniel heard the sound of running footsteps on the snowy sidewalk and looked up to see a young woman in a blue dress rushing toward the chapel with obvious panic in her face. "Grace." "Oh, thank God, Grace," the woman called out, and Daniel immediately recognized her as the mother Grace had described. As Grace ran to her mother's arms, Daniel watched the reunion with mixed emotions. He was relieved that Grace was safely returned to her family, but he also felt a profound sense of loss at the end of this unexpected connection with a child who had touched his heart so completely. "I am so sorry," Grace's mother said to Daniel, through tears of relief. "I am Sarah Martinez. I had to step outside to take an emergency call about my job, and when I came back inside, the service was over and Grace was gone. I have been searching everywhere." "She is a remarkable little girl," Daniel replied. "She was very brave and she never stopped believing that you would come back for her." As Sarah gathered Grace to leave, the little girl turned back to Daniel one final time. "Mr. Daniel, I still think you would be a very good papa to someone. Maybe God will send you the right family when you are ready." 6 months later, Daniel received a letter that would change his life forever. Sarah Martinez was writing to thank him again for taking care of Grace that Christmas Eve, and to share some news. She had been hired for a position at a non-profit organization that helped single parents, and Grace had not stopped talking about the kind man who had helped her at the church. The letter continued with an invitation. Would Daniel like to join them for dinner sometime? Grace had been asking about him, and Sarah had found herself curious about the man who had shown such kindness to her daughter during a moment of crisis. 1 year later, Daniel stood at the altar of the same chapel where he had first met Grace, watching as she walked down the aisle as his flower girl, beaming with joy as she prepared to officially become his daughter through his marriage to Sarah. Do you remember what you asked me that night in the church? Daniel whispered to Grace. As she took her place beside him, Grace nodded solemnly. I asked if you could be my daddy forever. And what do you think now? Daniel asked. Grace smiled with the radiant happiness of a child whose deepest wishes had come true. I think God heard me asking, and he decided to say yes. Sometimes the most important prayers are whispered by children who understand better than adults that love is not about finding the perfect family, but about recognizing when God places the right people in your life and having the courage to ask for what your heart needs most.